All right, so in this lesson, we are going to be working with the concept of ellipses. An ellipse is basically another way of saying oval, but the idea is that when we're thinking about perspective, right, and this right here, this form is a cylinder. Um, when we are looking at the cylinder from the top directly, we have the shape of a circle. But as we rotate that back in space, right, notice that the top of that circle, the circle now becomes an oval or an ellipse. Okay, and the further we turn it until it gets exactly to straight, right? Notice, right, the top it gets thinner and thinner and thinner until it becomes actually just a straight line. But notice the bottom of the ellipse the bottom of the cylinder is rounded out, even though the top is straight. And so that's kind of what we're going to work on today is this idea that when you're trying to turn an object in perspective, right, how do you create that cylinder so that the ellipses are actually also in perspective, accurate perspective. So um, first thing we're going to do, just to kind of get a sense of drawing a circle with inside of a square, which is going to help us when we're actually creating the perspective later on. So what I'd like you to do is to draw a square, okay, just to get us thinking, what would the cylinder would look like from straight overhead. Okay, so essentially, I'm roughing out the square. It's completely perfect, but close enough. Okay, so I have a square. Now, if I was to draw a circle in it that where the edges of the circle touch the outer edge, right? The first thing I would want to do is figure out where my center point is. And to do that, you basically draw an X through that square. And that is exactly where the center point is. Okay. Now, also thinking about the radius of the circle, okay, we want the radius to span from the center to the outer edge here, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to make I'm going to draw a line that's parallel to the top and the bottom of this square, okay, through that center point. And you'll see why this is important later. Okay? I'm also going to do the same thing the other way. Okay, so essentially creating some crosshairs, okay, where the line is parallel to the outer edge, passing through that center point. Okay? So now I've established where the radius of the circle is going to be, from the center to the outer edge of the circle. Next thing when drawing a circle, I want you to notice that this segment right here, from the center out to the corner, right, if I divide this into thirds, okay, roughly thirds, so that's roughly 1, 2, 3, right, into thirds, right, and then go just a little bit further, that is essentially where the arc of your circle will be for that quarter. Okay? So again, if I divide it into thirds, go a little bit further, and then draw an arc that comes from the very edge of the square through that point and around. Okay? Same thing. Divide into thirds, go a little further, draw that edge, divide it into thirds, find it a little further, draw the edge. Okay? So essentially what we're doing is we're using the idea of a square to define the radius of the circle and finding some points that we can then translate into when we're drawing in perspective. So this is what we're going to do next. Okay? I'd like you to draw a horizon line somewhere on the paper. I'd like you to put a vanishing point kind of over towards the right-hand side. And then I want you to draw a rectangle. Okay? Now, because we're drawing a one-point perspective, we know that we see the front face of that rectangle. So I'm going to draw the whole rectangle. Okay. And now we're going to start our perspective. Okay. So I have my point, my vanishing point. I'm going to draw a line from edge, like we've done before with one-point perspective, and the top side, down, top corner. Okay. But I'm also going to, unlike we did before, I'm also going to draw converging lines from the top and the bottom on the other side too. And you'll see why. Okay. So I'm going to draw converging line across, converging line to the vanishing point. Okay. So now I'm going to define the back edge. Remember, the back edge has to be parallel to the front edge. Okay, so because I'm creating a cube, not a rectangular prism, right? I got to kind of eyeballing what feels about right as it's turning in space. I'm going to put it about there. Ultimately, for our purposes now, it won't matter too much, but you're going to try your best to kind of make it feel like a rectangular prism that has the dimensions of a square at its base. Okay? So now that I've defined that side edge, I'm going to line up from that bottom point, okay, that back edge, and I'm going to draw a line parallel to the front edge coming the other way, okay, and touches the converging line on the other side. Okay, so now what I've done is I've defined the bottom of that prism. Okay, if I do the same thing at the top, okay, from where the top edge of the back edge is, I draw a line that's parallel to the front edge that touches between the two converging lines. I've defined what the top is. Okay. Now, if I've done my work correctly, when I line these two up, where they meet the converging lines, it should make a rectangle. So you can see the back rectangle as it goes back in space, right? We get that sense of scale. Front is closer, and as it goes back in space, it gets smaller, but the proportions stay the same. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to translate this idea that in order to find the center point here, I have to draw an X. From each corner, I draw a line, corner to corner, and the other way, corner to corner. Okay. And so now I've defined where my center point is, just like I did in this one. To get to the radius defined, same idea. I'm going to create a parallel line to the front and the back, or right here, right? The front, top, front, and the back. A parallel line to go down through the center. So I'm going to line up, go through, draw through that center, that parallel line. Okay? So that's going to help define the radius right there. Okay? How far that circle goes over. Now I'm going to do the same thing coming the other way, except this time I'm going to use the vanishing point. Okay? So I'm using the vanishing point, lining up directly to that point in the center, and I'm drawing a line through. Now, I don't have to draw all the way from the vanishing point. I can just actually line it up to the vanishing point, put my pencil on the edge of the shape, and draw out. Okay? So that way I don't have to end up erasing so many lines later on. So what I've just done right there is I've translated those first lines we made inside of the square, looking at it from above, looking down. Now we're looking at it across, going back in space. So the same thing will apply. I have to divide from the center to the corner into thirds that segment, okay, that line segment. So I'm try to divide that into thirds. I'm going to divide this one into thirds. Now notice they're different, right? They're different in scale, but the proportions are the same, right? I'm still thirds, thirds. Right here, this is very longer than this line, but I'm still going to divide it into thirds because that's what happens in perspective. It changes a little bit, right? So this is in thirds, this is in thirds. I go a little bit further than a third, and that's when I can draw my arc from the point where it's touching the outer edge to the point where it's touching the outer edge, through that point to define that first arc, just like I did here. Okay, but now it's in perspective. Same thing. I'm going to do a little bit further than the third of the way out. Point to the edge of that rectangular, the trapezoidal shape, right? I'm going to be creating that next arc, okay? And so on. A little bit further than third, coming all the way out to the outer edge of that square, boom. And And then finally the last one, same thing. It's defining that curve as it goes through. So here what I've done is I've sort of defined this ellipse, right? This oval shape, right? That is basically the translation of this, but lying flat, going back in space. Okay? If I want to do the same thing up above, same idea. I draw a line, corner to corner, line corner to corner, coming back. I'm doing this without a ruler right here because I've had some practice in this, but you can still use a ruler, right? So now I have my center point. Okay, now I have to define a parallel line from the front and back edge through that center point. So I'm going to line it up, define that parallel line. And then now, this one I am going to use a ruler for. I'm going to line up my vanishing point on one side. I'm going to go through that center point. And I'm going to draw out. Okay, so now I've got my lines defined, just like I did originally on this one. And I'm going to divide it to thirds. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Right, roughly in thirds. They should be equidistant apart. Okay, really look, try to work hard at it. Thirds is half as easy. Thirds are a little bit harder sometimes. But if you work at it, you can kind of see I'm hitting them, doing a number of dots. But I'm kind of gauging that each segment should relatively be equal. I'm going to go a little bit further than that third, come out from the outside edge, hit that point, and create my arc. So you could eyeball it and try. So here again, coming to that outer radius right here, it comes around, and then around, and then around. So now I've created that oval at the top. Okay, done this correctly. These two sides should line up. It's just about right. Okay, so if I draw a line from right here coming down, I've sort of defined the edge of that cylinder. If I come the other way, it should, just where it's turning away, should be that point where it just touches that outer edge right there. So I'm going to move over here. Line goes up. And so now I've essentially created the top and the bottom of that cylinder. Okay. Now, we're going to, just to illustrate really how this is working, right? We're going to do two more. We're going to do one a little bit closer, and then one a little bit higher than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define, again, a line that is similar to this front line right here that comes from the side of the shape, across, hits the outer edge, goes back to the vanishing point to define how far it's coming in this direction. Now I'm coming back to here, coming up from the point where it met, coming back to that back side, or another way to look at it is come from here and draw to the converging line, and then straight across. Right? So this is now that other shape, right? As it's moving. And notice again, as it gets closer to the horizon line, that form is going to be exactly flat. Okay? It's literally going to be flat. Okay? If I go a little higher, and I draw a line, and then draw back to the vanishing point. Okay? Draw my parallel edge. Okay? I've defined it higher up. So as you go above the horizon line, you can start to see things from the bottom. If you're going below the horizon line, it looks like you're seeing things from the top. Okay? So same thing applies. If I want to make an ellipse now, I can draw an X through the middle. Okay, I found my center. Now I can draw a parallel line through that form. And then I can draw from the converging lines back. Okay, so now I've got that same thing, same lines translated again, flatter. It's probably going to be a little difficult at this point, but if you stay to the idea that we just did in the first one, you'll see it'll be very similar. And then I have to divide into thirds, those lines. It might be difficult to see, but try your best. Divide into thirds. And this is where I now create that ovoid shape that defines, right? So again, the edge of the cylinder, right, defines that curve. Same idea, right? Draw an X through the middle, find the center point, draw a parallel line up, draw the other way, divide into thirds. So I'm doing this a little faster because it is repeating the same concept. And then from the radius to each point, I'm defining the edge, defining that nice ovoid. Okay, so there you go. So the whole idea is, so you could leave it just like this, just because I want you to see that you can kind of create this form. Now remember, it's something kind of like this, right? That the idea is, let's say I had the top of this cylinder would be here, and now I could actually see what that curve is right here, right? Okay, if I was drawing this next line down, right, I could see that it's slightly less because it's getting closer to that horizon line, right? Then if I'm trying to draw the bottom, I'm noticing that it curves downward, just like this curves downward, okay? All right, so that's basically it. I want you to try to draw these 4 different ellipses in perspective, and that's it. When you're done, you just take a picture of it and submit it in through Google Classroom.